Friends, thank you for being here today. We stand at a precipice in our nation's history, a moment that history books will likely record as the end of one era and the violent birth of another. For decades, we have lived with the comfortable assumption that our geography was our destiny, that sharing a continent with the world's largest economy guaranteed our prosperity, provided we remained a polite and reliable junior partner. But the events of the last year have shattered that illusion, replacing complacency with a cold, hard necessity for survival. What if I told you that the special relationship we have cherished for nearly a century is not just fractured, but that our government has quietly decided it is no longer worth saving in its current form? And furthermore, what if the price of our continued sovereignty required us to fundamentally sever the economic umbilical cord that binds us to the United States? Today, we are going to look past the headlines and the noise of cable news to understand the structural revolution happening in Ottawa. This is not a story about a trade dispute. It is a story about a nation finally coming of age. It is a detailed analysis of how Canada is effectively betraying the expectation of subservience to secure a future where we are masters of our own house. To understand where we are going, we must first look at the harsh reality of the end of the junior partner era. For the generation of Canadians who built this country, your generation, the United States has always been a complex neighbor. We have admired their dynamism while often rejecting their social policies. We have welcomed their trade while guarding our healthcare and our culture. But we always believed that when push came to shove, we were allies first and competitors second. That belief died in February 2025, when the American administration imposed blanket 25% tariffs on Canadian goods and openly threatened annexation as a solution to trade imbalances. The mask slipped. But the true indignity, the moment that likely lost the United States the hearts and minds of Canadians forever, came shortly after, with the implementation of new border requirements. Starting April 11th, 2025, the requirement for Canadians entering the U.S. for more than 30 days to register and be fingerprinted was not just a bureaucratic hurdle, it was a profound insult. It treated citizens of America's closest ally, its largest trading partner, and its NORAD partner as potential criminal threats. The reaction from Canadians was swift, silent, and devastatingly effective. In February 2025 alone, Canadian travel to the United States dropped by 40%. This was not a seasonal fluctuation, it was a collapse. According to polling data, over 60% of Canadians now plan to avoid U.S. travel entirely. This is not merely a tourism statistic. It is a $4 billion annual loss to the American economy. Hotels are empty, border towns are withering, and American businesses are learning a hard lesson. Canadians may be polite, but we have a spine. We do not go where we are not respected. However, the tourism boycott is merely the emotional tip of a very strategic iceberg. While Americans watched their border towns struggle, officials in Ottawa were reading the writing on the wall. They realized that a 1.6 trillion trade relationship is not an asset when the other party uses it as a weapon. It is a liability. The goal for Canada is no longer just free trade. The goal is strategic autonomy. I would love to hear your perspective on this fundamental shift. Do you believe Canada is right to pivot away from the United States, or is this strategy too risky? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. This shift in strategy requires a new kind of leadership, defined by what we might call Mark Carney's calculated calm. In times of crisis, nations often turn to rhetoric, but in this crisis, Canada turned to competence. The resignation of Justin Judo and the subsequent rise of Mark Carney to the Prime Minister office marked a shift in tone that was tailor-made for this moment. Carney is not a firebrand. He is a technocrat, a former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He understands the plumbing of the global financial system better than almost any other world leader. His response to American aggression has been a masterclass in this calm resolve. When the U.S. ramped up tariffs on steel, aluminum, and autos, the expected political response would have been to scream and shout, to escalate the trade war tit for tat until both economies burned. Carney did something that confused the pundits in Washington. He de-escalated. In a move resembling political judo, Carney dropped many of Canada's retaliatory tariffs. He suspended the digital sales tax that had been a thorn in the side of American tech giants. He committed to meeting NATO defense spending targets. To the casual observer, this looked like capitulation. In reality, it was a strategic feint. By removing the specific grievances Washington was using to justify its trade war, Carney stripped the Trump administration of its excuses. He positioned Canada as the adult in the room, the reasonable, stable partner in North America. This was not done to please the Americans, but to signal to the rest of the world, specifically Europe and Mexico, that Canada was safe for business while the U.S. was volatile. Carney's strategy is based on a simple premise: survival. He knew he had to weather the storm of 2025 to build leverage for the critical mandatory review of the USMCA, CUSMA agreement coming in July 2026. He He wasn't trying to win a Twitter war. He was buying time to restructure the Canadian economy so that when he walks into that negotiating room in 2026, he holds cards that Donald Trump doesn't know exist. While diplomatic chess is played on the world stage, the government has simultaneously launched a $1 trillion gamble to restructure the nation from within. While Carney played the diplomat, his government unleashed a domestic economic revolution, the likes of which we haven't seen since the post-war industrialization. Budget 2025 was not a standard fiscal plan. It was a war chest. The government announced $280 billion in direct capital spending, a figure designed to catalyze approximately $1 trillion in total investment when private sector participation is included. Now, I know what many of you are thinking. As a generation that values fiscal prudence, the idea of a $78.3 billion deficit is alarming. It is a staggering number. However, we must distinguish between spending and investment. This debt is not being used to expand the bureaucracy or fund fleeting social programs. It is being poured into concrete, steel, and fiber optics. It is building the physical infrastructure of independence. The bond markets have recognized this distinction. Canada has maintained its AAA credit rating because global investors understand the logic. Canada is retooling its entire economy to survive without the U.S. market. The centerpiece of this budget is a reimagined procurement framework. Under the new Buy Canadian rules, corporations wishing to access these massive tax credits and subsidies must commit to sourcing a minimum of 60% of their inputs from Canadian suppliers or from allied trading partners. The terminology here is crucial. In the current geopolitical climate, under the aggressive policies of the current U.S. administration, the United States does not automatically qualify as a reliable allied trading partner in the eyes of Canadian strategic planners. This policy forces supply chains to decouple from American sources and look inward or across the oceans. The explicit goal of this policy is aggressive: to reduce Canada's export dependence on the United States from its current paralyzing level of 75% to below 60% within a decade. This is not just a trade target, it is a declaration of independence. To achieve this, Ottawa is looking east and west. We are seeing an expansion of the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with Europe, moving beyond simple goods trade into deep integration on critical minerals and technology. Simultaneously, Canada is pivoting to the Asia-Pacific, strengthening ties with Japan, South Korea, and signing a bilateral trade deal with Indonesia. Perhaps, most pragmatically, Canada has adopted a neutral trading partner stance regarding China. While Washington demands that its allies participate in its economic containment of China, Canada has quietly signaled that we will do business where it benefits Canadians. We are refusing to let American foreign policy dictate our economic reality. In this grand restructuring, we must also recognize our strategic ace, the province of Manitoba and the Arctic Gateway. For decades, the power centers were Ontario and Quebec. But in a world where resource security and non-U.S. trade routes are paramount, the province of Manitoba is emerging as Canada's secret weapon. To understand why, we have to look at the world through the lens of resources. We often talk about oil, but the gold of the 21st century is fresh water. And this is where Manitoba holds a distinct sovereign advantage. Consider the Great Lakes. They are a shared resource. We co-manage them with the United States. If the U.S. decides to drain Lake Michigan, there's little we can physically do to stop the impact on the system. Manitoba, however, is different. Lake Winnipeg, Lake Manitoba, and Lake Winnipegosis, these are massive freshwater reservoirs that sit entirely within Canadian borders. They are sovereign Canadian water. In a future defined by climate change and water scarcity, this Saudi Arabia of fresh water gives Canada immense strategic power that is wholly independent of American influence. Furthermore, Manitoba's geography offers a solution to the American bottleneck. For a century, Canadian goods have largely moved east-west along the border or south into the U.S. rail network. But as we pivot to Europe and Asia, we need a way out that doesn't rely on American goodwill. Enter the Port of Churchill. Located on the Hudson Bay, it is Canada's only deep-sea Arctic port connected to the North American rail network. The government is pouring investment into upgrading this port and the rail lines that feed it. Why? Because shipping grain, minerals, and manufactured goods from Churchill to Europe or Asia cuts days off the transit time and, crucially, bypasses the United States entirely. If the U.S. border closes, if tariffs rise to 100%, the rail line to Churchill remains open. It is a strategic escape valve for the Canadian economy, ensuring that our farmers in the prairies and our miners in the Shield can get their product to global markets without paying a toll to Washington. But beyond the movement of goods, there lies the resource shield, a story of critical minerals and the unexpected dividend of national unity. We must look deeper into the Canadian Shield itself to understand why our bargaining position is stronger than Washington realizes. We are transitioning from the age of oil to the age of electrons. And in this new era, Canada is not just a participant. We are a geological superpower. The United States, and indeed the world, is desperate for critical minerals: lithium, cobalt, nickel, and uranium. These are the building blocks of the 21st century economy, essential for everything from electric vehicle batteries to advanced defense systems. For years, the United States assumed it would simply absorb Canada's mineral wealth as a matter of destiny, integrating our mines into their industrial base under the guise of national security. But this pivot changes the equation entirely. By classifying the U.S. as an unreliable partner, Canada has effectively put its mineral wealth on the open market. This is a terrifying prospect for American industrial planners. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act and their entire green energy transition rely heavily on the assumption of frictionless access to Canadian minerals. Without us, they remain dependent on geopolitical rivals or unstable regimes. Mark Carney knows this. He understands that in a supply-constrained world, the seller holds the power. By courting European and Asian automakers and battery manufacturers to build processing plants here, on Canadian soil, we are moving up the value chain. We are saying, if you want our nickel, you build the batteries in Sudbury. If you want our lithium, you build the cars in Ontario. This ensures that the jobs of the future stay here, protected by the leverage of our resources. We are no longer a hewer of wood and drawer of water for the American empire. We are the vault of the global energy transition. Yet there is an even more profound, perhaps spiritual shift occurring within our borders that this external pressure has catalyzed. For my generation, and indeed for yours, the story of Canada has often been one of regional friction. We have seen Western alienation, Quebec separatism, and the indifference of the center. We have fought over pipelines, equalization payments, and language. But history teaches us a powerful lesson. Nothing unites a family quite like a threat from the outside. The aggressive posture of the United States, the threats of annexation, the insults to our sovereignty, has produced a unity dividend that no domestic politician could have engineered. For the first time in decades, we are seeing an alignment of interests between Alberta and Quebec, between the prairies and the Maritimes. The Premier of Alberta knows that American tariffs on energy hurt her province just as much as tariffs on aluminum hurt Quebec. The threat to our sovereignty has reminded us that before we are Westerners or Easterners, we are Canadians. This is not a unity born of starry-eyed idealism. It is a unity born of pragmatic necessity. We are realizing that if we do not hang together, we will surely hang separately. The $1 trillion investment plan works because it offers something to everyone: ports for the coasts, mining for the north, manufacturing for the center, and agriculture for the prairies. It is a true national policy for the modern age. This psychological shift is crucial. It has revived a sense of national purpose that many felt had eroded. It reminds us of the Canada that punched above its weight in the 20th century, the Canada of peacekeepers, of scientific innovation, of quiet strength. We are rediscovering our backbone. And a unified Canada, driven by a singular economic mission and backed by the resources the world desperately needs, is a far more formidable neighbor than the fractured collection of provinces the United States thought it could bully. All of these preparations, the budget, the trade deals, the ports, and our newfound unity, create leverage through alternatives for the upcoming CUSMA review and our alliance with Mexico. This leverage is critical because July 1st, 2026 is the date of the mandatory review of the CUSMA agreement. President Trump views this date as a trap he has set for Canada. He believes that by threatening to let the deal expire, he can force Canada to capitulate to any demand, be it on dairy, energy, or sovereignty. He operates on the assumption that Canada has nowhere else to go, but Mark Carney and his team are preparing to flip the script. They understand a fundamental rule of negotiation. Leverage is not determined by your size. It is determined by your alternatives. If you have no option but to sign the deal, you have zero leverage, no matter how righteous your cause. But if you can walk away, you hold the power. By spending 2025 building ports in Manitoba and Halifax, by signing deals with Indonesia and the EU, Canada is building the ability to say no. If the U.S. terms are too harsh, Canada can credibly threaten to walk away from CUSMA because we have spent a year building a lifeboat. Furthermore, the U.S. administration's divide and conquer strategy is failing. Washington hoped to isolate Canada and Mexico, bullying each separately. Instead, we are seeing the emergence of a coordinated Mexican-Canadian front. Both countries have realized that they are dealing with an unreliable partner. They are coordinating their negotiating positions. Imagine a North American trade structure where Canada and Mexico trade freely, prioritize Europe and Asia, and leave the United States isolated in the middle. It sounds impossible, but it is exactly what is being prepared. If Canada and Mexico negotiate as a bloc, the U.S. loses its ability to dictate terms. The integration of our supply chains means that the U.S. needs us just as much as we need them, especially for energy and critical minerals. While we secure our future, We are already seeing the fallout in the United States and the true cost of America first. The cracks in the American strategy are beginning to show. The assumption in Washington was that a trade war would hurt Canada and benefit America. The reality has been a boomerang effect that is hurting the very people the U.S. president claims to represent. American farmers are the first casualties. The Northwest Horticultural Council, representing apple and cherry growers, has warned of existential threats to family farms. Why? Because when you slap tariffs on Canada, Canada stops buying American apples. We buy from Chile or New Zealand instead. The Canadian market was a premium market for U.S. agriculture. Losing it is devastating rural communities in Washington state and the Midwest. The auto industry is bleeding. A car park crosses the Canada-U.S. border up to 4 times before a vehicle is finished. Every time it crosses, it now faces friction and tariffs. Ford and GM have cited billions in lost revenue due to this supply chain chaos. They are begging the White House to stabilize the relationship, but the administration is not listening. This is the tragedy of the current U.S. policy. By treating a trade surplus as a scoreboard and an ally as a vassal, they are destroying the efficiency that made North America the most competitive economic bloc in the world. They are learning a hard lesson. Reliability is a currency. And when you spend that currency on short-term political posturing, you eventually go bankrupt. If you are finding this analysis valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us continue to bring you these detailed geopolitical breakdowns. As we look toward the future, we are witnessing a nation finally coming of age. It is vital that we frame this correctly. What is happening in Ottawa, in the boardrooms of Toronto, and in the ports of Manitoba is not an act of hostility toward the American people. We share a continent, a language, and a history with them. We have family on both sides of the border, but the political entity of the United States has chosen a path of economic nationalism that leaves no room for a junior partner. The betrayal alluded to in the headlines wasn't Canada leaving the United States, it was the United States pushing Canada away. Canada simply had the wisdom and the courage to pack a parachute. That parachute is worth $1.6 trillion. It is built of new infrastructure, new trade alliances, and a newfound sense of national self-worth. We are witnessing a quiet revolution. We are transitioning from a nation that asks for permission to prosper to a nation that builds its own prosperity. We are seeing the emergence of Canada as a true middle power, sovereign, diversified, and strategically autonomous. The road ahead will be rocky, there will be costs, but for the first time in a long time, we are driving the car. And for a generation that believes in the value of independence and the importance of protecting our resources and our way of life, that is a journey worth taking. Thank you.